We'll start. Lahiri ji?
Yeah.
We'll start with this. Good morning, dear friends. Sri Aurobindo Complex Trust welcomes all of you here. We start this session with 2 minutes invocation.
Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate.
We extend a very warm and soulful greetings to all the august audience present here, including the online ones, on today's auspicious occasion of 23rd April 2022, the concluding session of Savitri Yagya, which started from 17th April to 23rd April. As part of Sri Aurobindo's 150th birth anniversary celebration talk series, we have with us Sri S.S. Lahiri ji, trustee, Sri Aurobindo Complex Trust, to give a talk on Arise, O Soul, and Vanquish, Time and Death. Namaste, Lahiri ji.
Namaste.
Let me just introduce him. Lahiri ji is a trustee, Sri Aurobindo Complex Trust, JP Nagar. He regularly conducts Savitri classes on Tuesdays from 10:30 a.m. to 12 noon at Sri Aurobindo Society, Alsur Bhavan. He is also a regular speaker at various centers and branches on the teachings of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. He has served in the Indian Air Force and is a recipient of 2 presidential awards, one from President Venkatraman in 1993 and one from Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam in 2003 for rendering meritorious service to the nation. Friends, this program is also being live streamed on YouTube. Those who are unable to view it on Zoom can view it on the YouTube. We request all the participants to mute their mobiles for the talk. Lahiri ji, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Vaishali. Good morning to everybody. Today, we are discussing a subject which is quite an intense subject. And those who have been studying Savitri thoroughly, regularly, they will definitely know into which region of Savitri we are venturing into. Before we actually get into the meat of the matter, let us formulate our mind to get into the subject. How did this epic Savitri was seen by Sri Aurobindo? Sri Aurobindo, in a letter, wrote that he used Savitri as a means of ascension, means of climbing. Each time he could reach a higher level, he rewrote a portion that was written from a lower level. So it was revised again and again and again. Just to give an indication, the very first page of Savitri was perhaps revised 25 times. There is a documented evidence of all the 25 revisions. So one can make out how much of work he had put in this particular composition of Savitri. And Savitri he never considered Savitri to be a poem which has to be written and finished, but as a field of experimentation to see how far the poetry could be written from one's own yogic consciousness, considering that it was being written in English. The difficulties and impediments were very high because English language does not permit quite a bit of writing things in a symbolic fashion. And so Savitri is actually a record of his seeing. What he saw, what he experienced, he wrote it down. Mother says that these are experiences lived in by him, realities, supracosmic truth. And he experienced all these experiences, the joy, the sorrow, and experienced them physically. He walked in the darkness of that inconscience, almost in the neverhood of death, almost as if his soul was about to get extinguished. He had to go down there to those levels because he was in search of something, search of salvation of human race. And this salvation is not mukti, which is a traditional Hinduism and traditional religion of Hinduism practices. And everybody says, go for mukti, go for mukti. Mukti is something from which he starts. He wanted divinization of earth. That was his aim. Mother says also that these were while he crossed these realms one after another, and we have seen that in the world travelers, he's endured a lot of difficulties, a lot of injuries, a lot of sufferings. He accepted those sufferings. And he wanted to transform the sufferings into joy and bring in victory to the world. Then we know, also Mother had said that this epic Savitri is Sri Aurobindo Yoga of transformation. Transformation at the personal level, not only for Sri Aurobindo, as the triple transformation is life divine tells us that these transformations have got to be taken up in us also. And this yoga appears for the first time in the earth consciousness. Long back, much after Sri Aurobindo laid down his mortal body, Mother in 1954 had said that some part of Savitri can be understood mentally, but the major part needed knowledge and experience, experiencing what is being told for understanding it. So it is that kind of a stuff we are discussing today. And let us hear, we have also read what K.D. Setna, Amal Kiran had said. K.D. Setna is such a great personality in the field of philosophy, English language, and also in Sri Aurobindonian philosophy. He says the poetry has to be good by an ascension of poetic quality and ultimately to the highest spiritual plane possible for the writer, the poet to arrive at. That is how the Vedas, Vedic mantras were riks and mantras were written. They had to ascend to a highest level, which was possible by that rishi. And what revelations he got, he uttered that. Similarly, here also, Sri Aurobindo, the particular level from which he wanted to bring down things and jot down was perhaps the highest spiritual plane that was possible. And this plane has to be creative in terms of its poetic values also. It cannot be just for the sake of writing. So Savitri should express poetically always the ever higher peak reached by Sri Aurobindo, which could be formed into an epic written in English language, as if English language is also being Sanskritized. So this is the difficulty in which expressing something, somebody who is visualizing him, something within him. How do you transfer it on a paper and then for others to understand what is being transferred in the sense that the poet wanted it, giving the fact that he is not writing it in Sanskrit but in English. So Savitri has to be taken as Sri Aurobindo's spiritual autobiography as seen by us, which is meant to make us relive in the inner life of both poetic creativity and creative spirituality. Creative spirituality as well. So that is what this odds to this effect, this thing. What is what K.D. Satna had said. Now, you see, today we concluded a 7 days long Savitri Yajna at JP Nagar. One important aspect of Savitri that Sri Aurobindo perhaps conveys is that it is truth in dynamics. The form that is the truth in dynamics that forms the creative, forms the trajectory of creation. The truth in its movement is forming the trajectory of creation. And this implies that to enter into it, we have to make considerable spiritual progress. While Savitri itself can become a means for that progress, there is needed the equally important basis of our willingness to undertake such a task. So we must have a willing participation, which is reverential, to undertake such a task of doing a Savitri Yajna. Now, Savitri Yajna that has been conducted in JP Nagar is an action put on ground, an attempt to express the power of the truth contained in that. Because the text is the consciousness of Sri Aurobindo's expression of his consciousness. And an action that will contribute to the main goal of a new creation. That was the aim of Savitri in any case. So wherever we read Savitri, we must reverentially touch, feel, and climb in order to experience Savitri. So we know that because Savitri or the transcendental Mahashakti. I'll not come to Savitri as yet, but transcendental Mahashakti, about which Sri Aurobindo talks about it in his book Mother, the Mother. That transcendental Mahashakti is not extra cosmic. She is supracosmic. The transcendental and that transcendental Mahashakti, by accepting the suffering here, is actually conducting her yajna tapas in the very body of ignorance and night. And it is through Savitri, her daughter, that the suffering gets expressed. So that is Savitri. Savitri is the embodiment of that Mahashakti in the ignorance. Kindly try to picturize this. Savitri, she is the embodiment of the Mahashakti in the ignorance, in the avidya. So that's the kind of expression she was. That's the kind of individual she was. So we come across lines like this in Savitri, that Savitri was born half divine. Her mind, a sea of white sincerity with not a single turbid wave. And in her, love, the God of love, met his own eternity. Also we read that she is the word that knows. W capital. She is the word that knows. So, Savitri's yajna, or Savitri's yoga, I'm talking about the Savitri epic. The process involves a yoga tapas, an aspiration which is both extensive and intensive. Extensive in terms of its spread, and intensive in terms of its depth. And today we shall briefly, very, very briefly, touch upon this movement of Savitri in her journey. What are the problems she had faced? The problem she had faced is whether to accept death or fight and create the way to the immortality. This is the choice she had to make. This is her problem that she faced, which we have come across in the very second canto. And from there, Sri Aurobindo actually relates this particular aspect in page 12 of the book beautifully. If those who have the page Savitri, and maybe for a few those who are physically present there will definitely be having, her soul's debate with embodied nothingness must be wrestled out on the dangerous dim background. Her being must confront its formless cause against the universe, weigh its single self. And slightly below, in the world's death cave, afford light's helpless claim and vindicate her right to be and love. See, there are new concepts have been put in there. There is a term here as embodied nothingness, and also the term of death cave. In the world's death cave, afford life's helpless claim and vindicate her right to be and love. Now, this nothingness, embodied nothingness, is the personality of death. This nothingness comes from non-being. And death cave is the terminology that Mother uses, is a domain of death, which in Katha Upanishad we here know it as a hall of death. So, this is what she has come to. Then we also see that the celestial Rishi Narad visited the palace of Ashyapati. Why did he visit? Why did he visit Ashyapati's at a right time? What a wonderful time he visited. He knew this is the time perhaps for Savitri to return to the palace and come to the Darbar hall. But why did Narad come here only to meet Savitri? No. Yes, that is true. But that is not all. He saw, and we read it, that seeing the tardy progress of the globe below, he is finding that this earth is not proceeding, not progressing much. So his assigned mission, for which his Narayana had sent him down, was to initiate Savitri into that matter, into that issue, to get that issue relaunched, to prepare her for that task for which this daughter of heaven had taken birth here. So Narad surely knew that the central significant move of the terrestrial existence is evolution of consciousness in matter. Narad surely knew it. That is why he found that the evolution is slow. And Narad also knew that if Savitri does not rise to this occasion and tackle these old laws, the old laws will remain unchanged for yet another Vedic cycle when she will have to be sent down. So a slow, lingering, tardy progress is not desirable, and he found this has got to be set right. So what did he do? He marked a date in the calendar that it got to be done by this date. And that date was the day on which Satyavan must die. So this is how the whole process was expedited. And Savitri, after having met Satyavan, upon her return to the palace, met Narad, and both her parents, King Ashyapati and the queen, and he heard all that was being spoken there, what Narad said, what the Ashyapati said, and how the queen mother had reacted. But she declared something else, kind of a finality of whatever decision. And that we find again in Savitri, in page 436. And he says, "For I know now why my spirit came on earth, and who I am, and who he is I love. I looked at him from my immortal self. I had seen God smile at me in Satyavan. I have seen the eternal in a human face. So these lines tells us that she is now single-minded to do what she was determined to do. So Narad accomplished his mission. So Savitri reaffirms her decision to marry Satyavan, and come what may, she declared to the king and the gathering, my father, I have chosen. This is done. And Narad's mission was accomplished. And he lives perhaps for another mission. Now, this is what we see. Let us now look at what we have read in Life Divine and also in Savitri. What is the aim of the Supreme? The Supreme Consciousness has become inconscient here. The aim of the incarnate Supreme is to revive this buried Supreme to free the human consciousness in its earthly life, and much more. Now let us see what needs to be done. What is she required to do for that? What Savitri is required to do for that? Now, who can execute God's will? None other than his consort. None other than his consort. That is God nature. God as nature. Nobody else can execute that. So Savitri, to do that job, she must have to aspire, invoke, and realize that force and nature in her. She has to qualify. She has to be an Aadhar, appropriate for the task. So for that, she has to do the Yajna Tapas. And that is what Savitri tells us. Also, we find that this Yajna or this tapas and this path of pilgrimage has to have two stages, two periods. The first, that of preparation, and the second, that of accomplishment, that is the conquest of death, who is standing as an impediment on the path of the divine event. So these are the two stages we have to see in the Savitri's Yajna. So for the convenience of our talk, I have split it into two parts, and I have given them two titles. One is Purva Tapasya and another is Uttara Tapasya. Those who are curious to know why have I done this kind of a name, I've just used these terms from our ancient darshanas. In our darshana, we have Purva Mimamsa and Uttar Mimamsa. So I have borrowed these terms from there and told me first part I have used as Purva Tapasya. Let us see the Purva Tapasya. Now, once Savitri's initiation by Narad and her determination to stay put in that direction has been done, we see the author, the poet, slowly changes the direction, slowly, carefully, deliberately, veers the epic beyond a personal tragedy. It was a personal tragedy because this was the day Satyavan must die, and it was known that one swift year was all that was granted. The work had to be done. So the poet slowly, deliberately, in a calculated fashion, veers the epic from a personal tragedy and the death of Satyavan becomes only a harbinger of a new order, a new life, or a race and a creation. And this was aimed at that day when spirit shall look out through matter's gaze, and the matter shall reveal spirit's face. That was the thing that was required. Now, the distant mission, obviously, we now know is the new creation, while the immediate task was to clear the path for the divine event, which is blocked by the huge foreboding mind of night. So this event is not taking place, obviously, because mind of night, N capital, is blocking the way for going forward. So what was also required? Sri Aurobindo uses this word, mind subliminal in mindless life. Subliminal mind in mindless life. We find that in our cantos leading on life, in Travelers of the World, in that particular book. And eventually this particular mind of night has got to change to mind of light. That is how it is required to happen. Savitri herself has come on earth in mortal body to receive the Supreme's grace. This grace is for Satyavan, and Satyavan, we have read in the very introductory short para by Sri Aurobindo, is the soul of the earth. Now kindly see the canvas. Kindly see the canvas that is being Sri Aurobindo has unfolded in those pages. So, as a first stage, she begins the first part of Yoga Tapas, which is realizing her own soul. And we find that Sri Aurobindo says she knew that first she must discover her soul. She had subsequently she moved to the forest, hermitage, lived with Satyavan, and she initially in the forest life of Savitri, in the union with Satyavan, death did not feature very prominently in her mind. because their union was fusing the joys of earth and heaven. She had forgotten the grief of death of Satyavan, which was awaiting just outside her door. For a initial few days, she had forgotten that. So, but really, slowly she recognized that. And we find such wonderful line as uh, at the page 472. Thus in silent chamber of her soul, cloistering her love, to live with secret grief, she dwelt like a dumb priest with hidden gods, unappeased by the wordless offers of her days, lifting to them her sorrow like a frankincense, her life the altar, herself the sacrifice. So, this is where Savitri was under a terrible grip. She moved into a grip of anguish. Slowly, she became intensely aware of her sorrow and came under the grip of fear and anguish. It tormented her days and nights. Because the day Satyavan shall die was marked on the calendar as prophesied by Narad. Her sorrow was deep within her. And it used to, it was coming to her very speedily, suddenly she realized, and she was feeling dejected about it. But she kept her grief totally secret. Neither the blind father-in-law, the king in exile, or the queen in exile could know. Her daily activities never reflected her sorrow. Even Satyavan did not know. It was kept very secretly. What was kept secretly? Her daily, Sri Aurobindo says, her daily oblation of her unwept tears. What words? That apart, she had also identified the world's grief with her own grief, so that the world's grief also is conquered. And yet, she lived a normal outer life. Savitri now experienced an intense grief, and his grief was literally frozen. And not only frozen, it was almost personified. Sri Aurobindo says, self of grief. And consequently, Savitri became so calm that even the impending death of Satyavan did not really matter to her. In her, grief and love got fused together. And attaining such a calm in the midst of such a grief without a ripple by itself is a very big step in the field of yoga. Unimaginable feat she attained. Now, this is the situation that led to the poise where grief self itself became calm, and Sri Aurobindo says, dull-eyed and resolute. Now, what is this pain? What is this pain? You see, the god of pain, it is stated, guards the world of nothingness. So conquering pain would eventually clear the path to conquering death. It is as if the sentry is first tackled and then the people inside. So the god of pain is considered in that fashion, that it is a product of nothingness and it is actually guarding the entry into the death's domain. So this part of Savitri Yoga, we can visualize that all this happened in a waking consciousness. In a waking consciousness. She was awake as she was vigilant of the sleepless night that was staring at the trail of time. So says the poet. She became calm witness to her mind's movement, and she receives a command of a mighty voice. And with the appearance of that voice, her mind settled down, renounced all thoughts, and her heart listened to the voice. Sri Aurobindo says, her heart listened to the voice. She heard the command she received in that sleepless night. And that command told what? Why have you come to this death-bound world? This ignorant life beneath this indifferent sky. You are an immortal energy. You have forgotten that. Was it to only nurse this grief in your heart that you have come here and wait for that doom to arrive, that is death to arise? Or have you come for a greater purpose? And she receives the command, arise, O soul, and vanquish time and death. This is how she was launched into that path. Now, why do you have to find? We may ask a question, very interesting thought that may come to us, that why do you have to find soul? There are many answers at many various scriptures. Sri Aurobindo says very clearly, all that it is utterly very difficult, maybe it is not, it is impossible to handle the universal forces unless one is armed with the realization of his soul. And also in our Bhagavad Gita, we have read Atmani Atho Mahi. First you go to the Atman and then you come to me. Our Upanishads tells us also, I think Katha Upanishad tells us that like removing the central reed of a palm leaf, you must find your soul. That means you have to totally separate and meet your soul. Separate from all other activities, all other wailings, etc. Then see it. Then only it will be have an integrating force upon our nature. Sri Aurobindo says this. Now this voice that Savitri heard kept on guiding her all through her journey. And whenever there was a stumbling, there was a balancing act that this voice did. And now, at a stage, this power within her asserted that she herself is a portion of the divine. This is. So it was told to her, she was told repeatedly at all places, remember why you have come, conquer your heart's throb, let thy heart beat in God. That means live in God. Don't live outside. Now Savitri looked into herself and searched for her soul. Now it is as if now it appears he entered into Swapna Avastha, from Jagrata to Sapna. Now what happens? A dream discloses to her cosmic past. Her cosmic past, how the evolution had taken place, how she had journeyed, she saw it in the form of a dream. Very interesting, I found. And a portion of Mighty Mother came into her. And this is what we find at also in the same book of yoga. We find a portion of the Mighty Mother came into her as into its own human part. Then to mold humanity into God's own shape. And down below, to mold humanity into God's own shape or a new world discover or create. But for such a vast spiritual change to me, out of the mystic cavern in man's heart, the heavenly psyche must put off her veil and step into common nature's crowded room. So this was a significant gain again that Savitri received. In this context, Mother says that the psychic being attains its culmination, full stature, its total fulfillment, if and when it unites with a being or personality from above. That means a being or personality must descend, and psychic being must meet and realize that. And that is what has happened now. A portion of Mighty Mother came into her. So what the Mother has said echoes completely in this place. And what does Sri Aurobindo say in Life Divine? He also says the similar thing. He says self-knowledge is impossible unless we go behind our surface existence. Self-knowledge is not possible unless we go behind our surface existence. Unless we go behind this and send down our measuring stick into the subconscient and open ourselves to the superconscient so as to know their relation to our surface being. So we have to know the relation of our surface being with the various other planes. How do we fit into the total scheme of things? So Savitri also follows similar paths. She enters into the inner world. So what she does through the portals of the subconscient that was suffocating, she enters into the region of subtle matter and forces her way through the body into the soul. This is the route she has followed. We find this from the Savitri. Savitri is a human embodiment. She was given only 12 months out of her earthly life. And in that short span of time, she had to do all these preparations. Before she can get launched for the main mission. But here, the embodied divinity that she is facing a debilitating crisis. And when she faces that, a voice from the secret heights comes down and speaks to her. Now, at this time, a fresh command came to her that go still deeper. Command was now to go deeper and deeper. And she did that. She did that and entered into her subliminal self. Subliminal self is what is behind us. Her dream discloses to her her cosmic past that we saw, and she journeys through the extensive avenues of that entire vista of that frontage. She surveys the dark regions and the entities, and then came some helpful beings who told her, pointing to a silence dim on a remote extremity of sleep in some far off background of the inner world. She continued her progress through the deeper doors, going further deeper. That was the instruction, go still deeper. And she felt a silent nearness of the soul. And then the soul. And then Sri Aurobindo says in wonderful lines in the page 527. Those who have the Savitri may open it. Here in this chamber of flame and light, they met. Who are they? The presiding soul, S capital, and soul of Savitri. They looked upon each other and knew themselves. The secret deity and its human part. The calm immortal and the struggling soul. Then with the magic of transformation of speed, they rushed into each other and grew one. So the divine soul inside and the little soul advancing forward came face to face and they grew into one. Exactly this picture you get when you see that one big royal kingly bird on the top of the tree and a small bird eating bitter fruits and climbing one by one branch up, and they come together at a later stage. So this is what happened. Savitri's soul was now revealed to her in its fullness. She viewed the destiny for which she had come down and the great work she had to achieve here upon earth. Not for any personal purpose, she was doing this, but it was for some cosmic purpose she was to serve. Now the Godhead in Savitri was fully awake and established, settled, seated. This was the divinity incarnate in her body. Now is the time to start the second part of her tapas. Her action to achieve what she came to the earth for. Now, the way Sri Aurobindo, K.D. Setnaji has said it, I could not access K.D. Setna's himself statement, but it is quoted by somebody else in Peter Hayes. In Sri Aurobindo's treatment of the Mahabharata, which is a legend of conjugal love, Savitri's struggle is twofold. One in the human form. She undertakes the process of inner journey, finds her soul. With that, she infinitely expands her consciousness. And with the help of this wealth, she wages an all-out war against Yama, the god of death. Now, we can say that Savitri is, to an extent, greatly psychicized. We are using a terminology from Life Divine. Now let us see the Uttar Tapasya, the second part. Who can win? Savitri is now set to defeat, vanquish death. Now, who can do this job? Who can do this job? We have to first find out, whenever in a particular organization or a management, you do the strength analysis, threat analysis, opportunity analysis, and weakness analysis. So we have to find out who can do this, who has got the necessary strength and who has least weakness. And we know it is only divine who can do this job. We have seen that. We talked about it something earlier. God nature can do it. And here begins the second stage of this mission, her work to conquest the earth. Now, conquest the death. Now, death is a cosmic principle. One of the problems that we face, we think that death is a ordinary thing that we all human beings are going to face. Sri Aurobindo says nothing, no. It is not that. It's a cosmic principle. And for death to be conquered, Savitri not only has to become cosmic, but even as a cosmic principle, she can't do it. She has got to be transcendental. Otherwise, it's not possible. So a divine human who is divinized, can alone conquer death. So she has got to be a greater divine than what she was. She was born half divine, which means she was born half human. The entire portion of the human part of her had to be expunged. Whatever was uh, whatever is going to impede her achievement, then only it can be done. Now we find that she has made a choice, and Sri Aurobindo says beautifully. And why I'm quoting this primarily because we find similar lines in Rig Veda also. And there are 4 or 5 lines. The whole sentence goes into longer line, but I'm going to only say the first. It's a longer portion. I'll only quote a few lines. He says, a Godhead stands behind the brute machine. This truth broke into a triumphant of fire. A victory was won for God in man. And the important line that I underline is that deity revealed its hidden face. And we find in the 5th mandala of Rig Veda these similar lines, echoing similar lines. Devanam shreshtam bupusham apashyam. The Rishi says in 5th mandala, 62nd sukta, he says, Ritena ritam aprahitam dhruvam vam. Suryasya yatra vimuchyati ashan dasha shata shaha tastur tak ekam devanam sreshtham vapusham apashyam. That means I saw, the Rishi says, I saw his great physical body. Vapusham apashyam sreshtham devanam sreshtham vapusham apashyam. So now we find this is how Savitri's journey is moving. Right? We also find, it may be worthwhile bringing this, that is the last darshan day of Sri Aurobindo before he left his mortal body on 5th of December 1950. On 24th November 1950, which was darshan day, his last darshan days for us, he had mentioned that the descent of supramental is inevitable and is decreed. It was a verdict given. And we know that this alone will finally eradicate the death. But why there is death at all? Then we ask the question, why there is a death? Why should there be death? That Sri Aurobindo explains beautifully over many pages in Life Divine. He says, briefly, he says, the Death is imposed on the individual life, on me and yours, of mine and yours, both by a condition of its own existence, the condition in which our life exists, and by the relation that this life has with all the life all around in the universe. So he says, unless that is sorted out, death will continue. What is death? Death is only a change of form that is needed now. It is still needed now. And death is a force of darkness. So as long as we have darkness, that long we'll need the death. Can death be undone? Yes. By transiting to a state beyond the present state, it can be undone. And in that state, spirit would not have the need to change the form. In that state, the spirit will not have the need to change the form. So what happens? Death also undergoes a transformation. And this is what the epic of Savitri is all about. This is the theme of Savitri is this. So he says death is our road to immortality. He says men die that men may live and God be born. He says death is the spirit's opportunity. So how did the death come about? Now, death is not merely a dissolution of the body. It is indeed nothingness, that is non-being. Now, as soon as being established itself in this terrestrial plane, there came about against it an opposite force, a non-being. As soon as being came up, non-being responded back. Non-existence came up. And against an everlasting yes, there was erected an everlasting no. And here in the terrestrial, this everlasting no is embodied even in each atom. And that is what has expressed itself in the material domain, resulting into a degradation that is irreversible in the mortal world. So, how do we erase the everlasting no? Death is born out of inconscient, but it's an universal force. Our soul is an individual entity. And even if it universalizes itself, it cannot undo death. Only a transcendental principle or power can undo death. So Savitri must have to attain transcendental status to undertake that task of erasing the everlasting no. This is the issue. Now Sri Aurobindo would say that this negation is only an apparent obstacle. It's not a real obstacle. And when Savitri's vision penetrated beyond, she sees that death is a way of achieving the end more swiftly and more completely. Doesn't it remind us what happened on 5th December? It does. The negation is an apparent obstacle in order to increase, to purify, and intensify the speed of the process by which the world and humanity is going to be remodeled. When Nirod Baran asked Sri Aurobindo on 5th December that you can cure yourself, why aren't you doing it? His crisp answer was, you will not understand. So this terrible Godhead chases the human being, human endeavor, till the end. Until he finds that nothing more is required to be done by that person. Nothing mortal is left in him to be perfected. Because he is a Dharmaraj. He is going to not allow anybody enter into the gate of immortality if there is an amount, an element of mortality in it. No amount of mortality should be left in him. It has got to be perfected. Then only that his mission is fulfilled. So, Narinida writes about it very wonderfully at some place. He says that death is carrying away the luminous soul of Satyavan. Savitri, following, tries to learn more and more about the mighty death. She wants to learn more about mighty death so that she can defeat death. There has been more than 18 times that Savitri has a dialogue with the death, and death had spoken about 20 plus times. That much of interaction has taken place, dialogue has taken place, debate has taken place. So each has this divine being. They have obviously understood each other to a great extent, what is whose strength and what is his weakness. So this shadow, death, the shadow of nothingness, is leading the way. Satyavan is following. Savitri is from behind leading. And death saw Savitri pursuing, and he turned and tried to dissuade her from pursuing. Savitri refused to turn back without the soul of Satyavan. This death pursues human on his pilgrimage till the end. Savitri knows this. Now, Savitri also increased her status. And even in that status, if she goes and exceeds death, then death dies. Because there is no need for death thereafter. Now, in that debate and journey, death arrives at a cross section. What should I do? In a desperation, she cries out. Death cries out. And he says, although no human clement to immortality, reveal thy power. show me your face that I may worship, if you are the mighty mother. And then he says, let deathless eyes look into the eyes of death. If you are mighty mother, as you are claiming, then let the deathless eyes of that mother look into the eyes of death, which is me. Let that happen. See the beautiful position, what a crossroad. Either he continues to stay as death, or through the look of the mighty mother, he transforms himself. Now he sees new Savitri, not the one he has been contesting, but the transformed one. And Sri Aurobindo says the atmosphere there becomes a luminous sea. And the eternity looked into the eyes of death. And when eventually the darkness perished and the shape of death, Sri Aurobindo says, crumbled. Death died. Death died there. So that figure was, that formidable shape was transfigured. As they mounted higher and higher regions of being, and a change was visible in Savitri throughout. Ultimately, the total light, bright light, consumed the death. Death was receding towards nothingness. And the divinity that Savitri was, the mighty Godhead, she entered into death's own domain. And she identified herself with the death's self, which is the divine himself. And ultimately that death was, mighty death was consumed. And Sri Aurobindo says, his body was eaten up by light, his spirit devoured. And so death came to its own death. And this death of death is not the death in reality, but a new incarnation. That part we are not discussing into, that does not come under today's topic, but that is in the everlasting day. Something else comes about. So a great splendor arose there, and Sri Aurobindo says a lotus of light-petaled ecstasy is there. And ultimately, the cover of death that the Supreme had put on for his own work in the mortal world disappeared, and in its place, the fourfold being, the Virat, Hiranyagarbha, Prajnanaghana, and the Chaturtha came about. Sri Aurobindo says, in him the fourfold being wore its crown. Now we see very interesting thing. We have to keep this in mind all the time. Life divine and Savitri must go parallel in my thought and my thinking. I cannot dissociate them. You know, there is a triple flight we see, like the triple flight of Vaman Devata. The first of her soul, of the individual, the next the universal, and finally the transcendental. Are compelled, are being compelled differently by an experience of non-being in Savitri's own consciousness. Now Savitri and Satyavan stand face to face with the Supreme Divine alone. There is a last choice to make. Death has been annihilated, immortality attained. One can rest there and enjoy, but Savitri chooses not to. Now, Nalinidas writes in another context very wonderful things, which is related. He says, the embodied divine does not discard or even minimize the human. On the contrary, it tries to greaten and embellish, heighten this earthly entity. A sea change is brought in the content and in the creation of the form also. But the essentialities of the form and the essentialities of the content are retained. He says something like a fossilization, like the way the Egyptians prepare the mummies. Somewhat in like a process of fossilization. He says the mortality is squeezed out and immortality is molded in. These are the words he uses. Mortality is squeezed out and immortality is molded in. And the divinity is there in its fullness, but to that is added what is exquisite that earth brings to the human. Wonderful words. That the earth adds a lot of things to the human, which the divine does not reject when he is being immortalized. So, first origin of sin is death. The God of denial, everlasting no, the non-existence, asat, that's the very source. The fount and origin of all misfortune and etc. etc. This demon, this adverse force, this anti-divine has to be tracked and destroyed or dissolved or transformed into its original origin. It has got to be dissolved in the original origin, not the cosmic origin. This is the nihil that will negate that asat, that is seeking to nullify the sat. This is what is required, and Savitri refuses the everlasting day. She says, I have not come here for this, and I am not going to stay. I don't want this everlasting day. I don't want to be here alone. My job is to bring the race, the human race upon. Vishali, what's it? How much time I have got?
5 minutes more.
Right. We have seen in Isha Upanishad that light alone is not good enough. Light alone is a greater darkness. Savitri has attained immortality as a human being, as a human personality. But that is not, that's not, she wants to have the experience and both darkness, avidya and vidya together. Not vidya alone or avidya alone. Of course, avidya alone is not. Now, this immortality is bolded in. We are told by Nalinida that mortality is squeezed out and immortality is brought in. We find in this text that how right Nalinida's observation is. Now, when this Savitri and Satyavan sees each other before coming down in that supreme arena, Satyavan looks at Savitri surprised. And Satyavan asks, what is this great change that has come into you, O Savitri? You are looking so bright. You are earthly, and yet you are not earthly. You are more divine. So it was noticed then. Mortality is not squeezed out, immortality is molded in. See this we must see this in this world. How is it that has happened? Again, when Savitri and Satyavan comes down, and the entourage of Ashwati, King Ashwapati, in search of them, gets into the dark forest, and they were returning back to their hermitage. If you remember, thus an old sage who was there in that entourage of the king asked Savitri, what are the changes I'm seeing you, my lady? And he says, oh, woman soul, what light, what power you are showing now. So this is how things have happened. So we see the importance of Savitri and how great it is. Mother has repeatedly talked about Savitri. Everywhere, in many places, he has talked about it. Few of them, time permitting, I'll read out. Mother says, and I'm quoting Mother, it does not matter if you do not understand it, but read it always. You will see that every time you read it, there will be something new revealed to you. I assure you, there is nothing under the blue sky to compare with Savitri. It is the mystery of mysteries. I tell you once again, there is nothing like that in the whole world. Then he says, even if you put this reality part in it out, even if one puts aside the vision of reality, that is the essential substance, which is the heart of the inspiration, and considers only the verses themselves, one will find them unique, of the highest classical kind. What he has created is something man cannot imagine, for everything is there, everything. Savitri is a revelation. It is a meditation. It is a quest of infinite, of the eternal. If it is read with aspiration for immortality, the reading itself will serve as a guide towards immortality. Even K.D. Sethna has said similar lines. At the back of his copy of Savitri, these words are written. There is some specific statement akin to this, his own creation. The importance of Savitri is immense. Its subject is universal. Its revelation is prophetic. I repeat it, I have not found anything comparable with Savitri. All these literary other works seem to me empty, flat, hollow, without any deep reality. Whenever I read, I immediately plunged into that light each time I read Savitri. It is a very, very beautiful light, a supramental light of aesthetic beauty, and very, very harmonious. With these, I conclude today's topic. If there's any questions, I'll try to take them on.
There's one question in the chat box by Yamini Wilfred. Question: when you say if you overcome pain, you overcome death. So does that mean that we are associating pain to death, but death is really not that bad?
Yes. Death is really not that bad. When we see death in its right perspective, we don't. Actually, your question has got two elements. Let me take them one by one. I did not say that pain is equal to death. What I mentioned is, God of pain is like a sentry, like a watchman in the domain of death, in the hall of death. Suppose the entry into the death's domain, there is somebody who is guarding it, and that person is picturized as pain. So there is a distinction in terms of their status or level. Having said that, pain, suffering, leading to death, and all that is a subject of its own. So the pain has been treated in Savitri in this sense. It is treated differently in Life Divine, but they are not different topics by itself. Secondly, you said death is a desirable thing. Death is a desirable thing only when that death is transformed. Death is always there. Death is always there. Our past is dead to us. But this past, which is just going back, it does not get as such dissolved. The past dissolves into the present, into the future. Now we are in such a state in our domain that we cannot properly separate the past and the present. It is extremely difficult. But if we can separate past and the future and stand in between and watch, then we'll be able to find out that death is not really what we think death is. Death is actually much more powerful. It is a shadow of the divine, dark shadow, not a luminous shadow. So that dark shadow comes because of the divine, his creation. He wants that format, that form must operate in the mortal world, the Smrityu Lok. And that leads to our problem. We think that death is bad. You know, Tagore has described death as maranare tuhi mama shama shaman. Death, you are like my Krishna. So it is as vast, I must say. The concept of death is very vast. And in Rig Veda, and Chandrasekhar is there in that in the room.
Yes.
Chandrasekhar will remember that in Rig Veda there is a sloka in which sloka depicts death sitting under a tree and drinking soma. So the death that we talk about is at two levels that has to be viewed. In one level, it is desirable that you want, and see the good job that he is doing. After all, who is death? He's the son of Vivasvat. That is what we know from Upanishads and from Bhagavad Gita. And so he is a very noble person, great person. He is there not to ensure that as long as there is a iota of mortality in you, something that is undesirable in you, you are not admitted into the world, into the immortal world. He is Dharmaraj, maintains dharma. So you are right, as long as you are in that frame. But when you are in the normal frame of ours, we will find that perhaps he is quite frightening. Okay.
Thank you, Lahiri ji, for a very lovely presentation. You have very beautifully explained the battle of Savitri with the universal time and death, her journey to the divine spirit within, and her ultimate victory over time and death towards a life divine on earth. Thank you once again. Well, friends, for newcomers, this is the book we are talking about, Sri Aurobindo's Savitri. Without being repeating, I'll just see a few lines by the mother on Savitri. Savitri alone is sufficient to make you climb to the highest peaks. If truly one knows how to meditate upon Savitri, one will receive all the help one needs. For him who wishes to follow this path, it's a concrete help, as though the Lord himself were taking you by the hand and leading you to the destined goal. And then every question, however personal it may be, has its answer there. Every difficulty finds its solution herein. He has crammed the whole universe in a single book. It's a marvelous work, magnificent, and of an incomparable perfection. We profoundly thank Sri Aurobindo and the mother. Well, friends, our next program will be tomorrow on 24th April the occasion of the mother's final arrival to Pondicherry. We have a collective meditation with music from 10 to 10:20 a.m., followed by distribution of message cards. And from 10:30 onwards, there'll be a talk by Dr. Shrikant Jamadagni on Vedanta as the religion of humanity, prospects and challenges. Well, thank you one and all, and see you all tomorrow. We close this session with 1 minute silence. Thank you, and see you all tomorrow.
Thank you.